Good day, everybody. Good day, and welcome to our Go Global International E-Commerce Choices for Companies webinar. We've got a great program, and it is top of the hour, so we will be starting right now. And hopefully you're all logging on. I just see the last couple of people coming on now, just great. We are really delighted to have you all here today with us to talk about international e-commerce choices for companies. So what should the strategies, what are the choices exporters have when they're looking to go online and looking to have e-commerce enabled sales? Right, my name is Susanna Hardy, and here we go. We're just gonna start talking about our international e-commerce choices for companies. First, a couple of minutes on housekeeping. In housekeeping, we're really just saying that, we have, this is part of a Go Global webinar series. There's lots of webinars that we've done over the last few years, and you can look at previous webinars if there are things that interest you, and click on them and download them whenever you want. Our next webinar, December 12th, is about selling online in Europe and particularly about GDPR compliance. This webinar will be 50 minutes long. There will be 3 polls during the webinar, and these are moments when we ask you to participate and vote and express yourself. There'll also be some handouts during the webinar, which we will give you on infographics, particularly about countries and e-commerce environments. There's a live Q&A at the end. We've reserved some time for that. We would really encourage you to put in your questions. There's a chat box and a question box you can see on the right-hand side panel. Put in your questions. We will get back to you on those questions and try and get you answers for those. There will be a recording. All of this is being recorded, and you will receive the recording and the slide deck on Friday of this week. Last but not least, at the end of this webinar, there's a very, very brief survey. Please fill it out. It's very short, just a couple of questions, which helps us direct our webinars and see what it is you want to talk about going forward. So let's introduce ourselves now. My name, as I said, is Susanna Hardy, and I'm Chief Content Officer for IBT Online. I've been working at IBT for a couple of years now, many years, and I think I can see from your audience, my audience today, I think many of you already have been on previous webinars, so probably know me already. I'm also joined today by Vanessa Lee Adamson, who's born and bred in Shanghai. She's worked in China and also in the UK and internationally, but always focus on the international markets, the global markets, and on the web and on e-commerce in particular, and on marketing. So we're really pleased that she's now joined IBT Online as the Senior Digital Marketing Manager for IBT, and I'm delighted to have her join us on this webinar. A couple of very brief points about IBT Online itself. IBT Online is a private company. We're a US company, although we also have offices in Europe and other places. We've been around for quite a while, since 2002, and we've worked directly with over 400 companies to provide them with websites and online marketing for their international markets. We have over 18 US states that work with us for state programs and export assistance programs, and then we're very pleased and proud to have won some awards and innovation awards and trade awards. So that's IBT Online. Now, what we're going to talk about today, today's agenda, then, this is a vast topic, absolutely vast. So we thought we'd really just try and give some top-level discussion first about the global e-commerce snapshot sort of thing. Just where is the landscape today in e-commerce on a global level? Then just focus in on some of the key markets and the key players in those markets and how they articulate between themselves. Then we're going to look down, and the biggest part of the webinar is really the choices that exporters have when they're looking at international markets. Which kind of platforms, which kind of markets, how should they go about things, what are the optimal, what is the best way to optimize their resources. And here, this is very much built upon our experience, and that's why we wanted to showcase a few case studies and best practices that we have seen over time to really sort of show those, put those forward and show you some of the things that we've seen has worked extremely well. So first, without further ado, let's just start off with Global E-commerce Snapshot. And I thought I would just sort of recap on that, on talking about what the world is online. The world is online. So just to sort of give that top level view, over half of the world's population is now online. And we're looking at about 250 million new users who came online for the first time ever in 2017. So this is really it's a vast, the majority of people now online and still growing. Much of this year's growth in internet users has been driven by smartphones, mobile data, basically. More than 200 million people got their first mobile phone in 2017. That's kind of something about it. 2/3 of the world's 7.6 billion people now have a mobile phone. And that's really what's powering this ubiquitous global event. The average internet user spends about 6 hours a day using internet devices. That's roughly about 1/3 of their waking life, of our waking life. And I guess what are they all doing? Well, social media. They're all communicating. Many of them are communicating. They're being social. The number of people using platforms in each of their countries increased by nearly 1 million new users every day throughout 2018. And one effect of all this social media is that people are searching less. They're just talking more and using social media for search more. This means that organic reach continues to fall. This has a big impact on when you're talking about e-commerce strategy, and we'll see that later on. But it also means, simply put, that companies need to pay to play. You need to invest directly. You can't just hope to be found. That's not the only way to go forward. So you need to use online marketing and social advertising to reach your audience, and that's whether you're B2C or B2B. Now, how does this affect a company? I thought the following diagram illustrates that quite well. In the past, you had more bilateral or binomial relationships between a customer and a company. Your customers were not usually discussing between themselves quite as much as you have today. The internet has enabled a much more multifaceted relationship. But also what it has is made the customer at the center. So it's customer-centric, client-focused, in other words. As a company, your duty is to somehow interfere and intervene into those relationships between customers, to try and influence what they're saying, how they're reacting, what they're talking about, to try and say, hey, talk about us, learn about us, think of us in a positive way. And that's where, I guess, online social media, online websites really come into play. Now, let's talk quickly about e-commerce in general. So e-commerce, just as a top-line view, really has exploded in the last few years, obviously. We're looking at 20% growth per year. It's already reached over 2.3 trillion, and that's, by the way, in B2C only. We'll get on to B2B in a moment. So global B2C is certainly over 2.3 trillion already. It's forecast to pretty well double in the next 2 or 3 years. That's pretty well a 3-fold increase in online revenue since the last few years. So it's really just a simple idea here. This massive opportunity of global e-commerce is really just too big now to ignore. It's no longer just in the retail and B2C. It's also in e-commerce's most overlooked category as well, services and B2B, which this graph doesn't even include. Worldwide, the number of people using e-commerce platform continues to increase. Roughly half of all internet users now use e-commerce. Since the big sort of recessions and crunch crisis of 2008, global trade has basically stayed flat. It has not recovered. But e-commerce continues to increase about 20% per year, certainly double digits every year. This has been pretty disruptive, and that's been most visible in the retail sector. But the so-called digitalization of trade will continue to change the way industry works and trade patterns and and how global flows of product and services go for years to come. We're really just at the beginning of e-commerce. I've put there on the right-hand side a couple of sort of stats. This comes from a report done by Shopify, and the numbers relate to their companies. 40% of consumers amongst their companies have consumed goods outside their own other country. That's global. Cross-border e-commerce continues to increase. These kind of stats that show you some of the main sort of features of e-commerce today. Now, what about B2B? B2B is actually the larger section of e-commerce. It is roughly 2.5 to 3 times the size of B2C. And I think they don't always realize that. One of the reasons is that it's actually really hard to find good statistics on it. We have a few that we've managed to sort of corroborate and really go through, which we've sprinkled out throughout this presentation. But I think that the real overwhelming feeling is that 75%, 3/4 of B2B buyers look online first and purchase online. So B2B e-commerce is reckoned to be over nearly $8 billion by the end of 2018, so 3 times the size of B2C. The United States is the second largest retail, so B2C, but the US and Europe combined are pretty small when you look at B2B. The lion's share of B2B basically is in Asia, most notably China, Japan, and South Korea. So those are the same countries actually that are fueling the growth in the B2C sector, together with the UK, Germany, France. But B2B, as I said, is dominated by those 3 in the Asian countries. I wanted also to list, and again, this is very much sort of top-down side. I wanted to list these sort of 10 lessons. This again comes from a different study from Shopify, and they sort of asked their 10 top brands, global brands, for the one lesson to take away. If they had to say one thing about e-commerce today, international e-commerce, what would it be? And just looking through those sort of top 10 lessons from global e-commerce companies, I note that roughly, that pretty well, 8 out of 10 of them are about making it client-focused, client-centric. Focus on your market. Localize wherever your market is. So localize to your local audience. Make sure that you are wherever your clients and customers want to be. Then there's 2 other ones which things like shipping and logistics are very important, and things like that, and make sure that your back end processes work well. But apart from that, 8 out of 10 are all about client-focused, client-centric, customer-centric, just as we saw earlier in my diagram about the online world being client-focused and customer-focused. And that's, again, something we're going to be looking at quite a bit in terms of e-commerce strategy. Now, I thought I'd just take a quick break. I'm hoping you're all sort of relaxed and getting into this presentation, so I'd give you a quick, what we call a cookie quiz. So this is a quick cookie quiz. And I just want you to all look at these slides, this next slide here, and tell me which of these different screenshots appeals to you. Where would you buy a chocolate biscuit or a chocolate chip cookie? Would you buy it in something in a language you don't understand, in a currency that's hard for you, euros or pesos or pounds? Do you call it a chocolate? Are you looking for a chocolate chip or a chocolate biscuit? If you're in the UK, do you read the ingredients? Does it look appealing to you? Does it look easy to get and trustworthy? These are all things I know. I've put I'm making light of it. I'm putting on chocolate biscuits, but still, these are things that are very important when it comes to looking at your websites, your e-commerce strategies. And with that, we are going to have our very first poll. So I'm going to select the poll here, and what I would like to do is ask: does your company sell today via e-commerce? A yes, now you're in domestic market, yes, in your domestic market, and some export markets. Are you thinking about it? Only in your domestic market? Where are you on the e-commerce spectrum today? At the moment, the majority of you are in your domestic market with a few export markets. But there's also quite a few of you still thinking about it. But at the moment, I'd say the majority of you are yes, you are active in e-commerce in your domestic market and a few selective export markets. Thank you very much. That was our first poll. And with that, I'm going to go to our section number 2 and focus on the key markets. I'd love Vanessa to step in here and give us a little brief overview of China.
Okay, thank you, Susanna. So China is by far the world's largest e-commerce market. It is about twice the size of the United States, as you can see from our pie chart here on the left. The China online world is very specific to China, but we want to highlight 3 characteristics that strike us the most when we work with our clients in China. The China internet world is very mobile, social, and content-driven. China is a highly mobile-focused market. This means that it is very fast-moving and fast-changing. There is something about using mobile to access the internet which encourages the use of more apps, more development, more change. This also means more disruption to the existing models. More apps, more disruption also fosters more social media. People everywhere are fusing search with social, and this is very true of China. Maybe you don't always trust the retail sector or the public sector, or maybe you have just suffered a lot from the parallel markets, the counterfeits, the scams. But it feels a lot more reassuring to get recommendations and thoughts from your friends and peer group than from official sources. Content is therefore highly personalized. So buying online payment structure, and social features are an integral part of the Chinese social media and e-commerce platforms. Here we listed the top platforms in China. Now, 2018 has recorded a 12% growth in e-commerce sales. Alibaba has smashed another Singles Day with a new record of $30.8 billion in the first 24 hours. Now, let's zoom in to some of the e-commerce dominators in China. First up, we have Alibaba. Alibaba was founded in 1999 by a former English teacher. Jack Ma is now worth $40 billion. Alibaba started off as a B2B portal connecting Chinese manufacturers with overseas buyers. Now it turned Singles Day from a university student event to a worldwide phenomenon. As we have just mentioned, in 2018, it racked up $30.8 billion transactions within the first 24 hours. Now, to give you an idea, Amazon ships 3 million packages a day. Alibaba does 12 million a day. It has moved from a marketplace to a social commerce platform. It allows consumers to have fun exploring, sharing tips, and buying. It is also expanding internationally via AliExpress, so now you can buy Chinese products everywhere in the world. As an e-commerce marketplace, Alibaba offers a one-stop platform for companies. They can provide the platform, the marketing, the payment systems. It all looks very easy, but we will look further into this later. Next up, we have Tencent. Tencent was founded in 1998 by Pony Ma, now is arguably China's most valuable company. Pony Ma is now worth over $50 billion. Tencent owns an instant messaging service called QQ, which was developed in 1999, and a multimedia social networking platform called Qzone, which was developed in 2005. And then in 2013, Tencent has opened up WeChat. So altogether, Tencent owns a spectrum of products and services covering social networks, media platforms like QQ.com, Tencent News, and payment services. We will dive deeper into WeChat and WeChat Wallet in a minute. So Tencent also owns a range of entertainment products as well, such as Tencent Games. But probably the one most Westerners know best is WeChat. So now let's talk about WeChat. WeChat is the online proxy for China. On average, Chinese internet users spend 1/3 of their online time on WeChat. It was launched in 2013. So in 5 years, it has gained 1 billion users. It's basically a messaging app. It has many other functions too. It's like messaging plus PayPal, plus Facebook, Uber, Amazon, Spotify, Tinder, and other apps all rolled into one. People use WeChat to pay rent, find a parking space, make investments, find a date, and of course, to buy and sell things. But instead of trying to become the largest social network in the world, WeChat focuses on a mobile lifestyle. Its goal is to access every aspect of its users' lives, including the non-social ones. To do this, WeChat basically pioneered a model of apps within an app. Millions, not just thousands, of lightweight apps live inside WeChat, much like web pages live on the internet. It's like an internet within an internet. It's a closed environment. This makes WeChat more like a search engine. So a WeChat official account has to play a role in any China e-commerce strategy. I am now handing over to Susanna to talk about e-commerce environments in the rest of the world.
Thank you, Vanessa. That was the whistle-stop tour of China. We have had a couple of webinars just focusing on the China e-commerce market if you have an interest in that. Now, just giving you, again, big landscape view of the European e-commerce market, I think you can sum it up by saying it is large, it's still growing, it's very mobile, and it's very cross-border. So those are the key things. The online sales in the EU, something in the region of about 360 billion, just a little bit larger, in fact, than the United States at 340 billion. It is still seeing good growth, double-digit growth in almost all of the markets. 1 out of 5 companies in the EU are now engaged in active e-commerce, so it is pretty widespread. I think what's interesting, though, about that pie chart that you see on the left is if you take the 3 largest countries, the UK, Germany, and France, you've basically got 2/3 of European e-commerce there, just that. The UK is a very large e-commerce market. It has 74% penetration rate. So 74% of people on the internet use e-commerce, and it has a high level of spend, one of the highest in the world. It doesn't actually have that much further growth to go, in a sense, because it's already so prevalent. Actually, France and Germany are interesting, both of them, because they're still better growth markets and better more scope for growth in that. But as you can see from that pie chart, and I've included Russia in it as well. It's a small market or a smaller market. E-commerce is really very widespread throughout Europe. Having looked at sort of the attendees on this webinar, I know that many of you are in the United States. I wanted also therefore to push this out. The EU is very similar to the United States e-commerce environment, and certainly in terms of B2C. There are obviously country-specific details and differences, particularly about how people use the web, how they access it, and so on. But in terms of the consumer behavior, it's very similar to the USA in terms of how they research online before buying and all of that. I would say, however, it is very more multilingual than the USA, and it has a lot more cross-border. What's interesting as well is that almost all, 95% of consumers who are multilingual, who are, say, I'm French, but I also speak some German, or I'm German, I also speak Dutch, or I'm Dutch, but I speak English, whatever it is. If they speak a major language, that's English, French, German, Italian, or Spanish, they buy online when their website is in their language. If it's what I'm calling a minor language, Dutch, Danish, even some of the Scandinavian ones, some of the Baltic languages, Lithuanian or something, then they're much more capable and able and willing to buy cross-border. And that, I think, makes a lot of sense. We have also done a lot of work and other webinars, on the European e-commerce environment, and I'm going to sort of leave it at that for now. We do have a webinar coming up in 2 weeks as well about online in Europe and GDPR, the data privacy requirements. Then, just for the sake of time, I am grouping the rest of the world in these 2 big categories. and I promised you some handouts on this. Most of you, I hope all of you, will be able to just pull the handouts from your tool box there on the right-hand side of your screen. You should see something called handouts and be able to download it directly from this. If ever that's not working, just either put it in the question or in the survey at the end, and we will send you all the handouts, which are, the Latin America B2C e-commerce market, the Brazil's online environment, Japan's online environment, European and Europe VAT, and the China online environment. These are all infographics which just give you all the highlights about those countries. So again, so either pull out the polls from the tool on the side, and it's just below polls and questions and chat box, or else put it in your in the survey side, and we will send it to you separately. Just very quickly then on these two gigantic markets as well. Japan, a huge market, the third largest in the world, just above Germany. Very distinctive in the way that it works. Very, very Japanese focused as well. One of the major things that you'll find in Japan is that you have something called konbini, convenience stores. And this allows people, it's sort of like a click and collect system that you would have in many parts of Europe. You can buy something online and then you actually go and pay for it and pick it up at a convenience store. The largest single online marketplace is called Rakuten, the Japanese company, and they have spread into quite a few other things like mobile phones and all kinds of other services. But that's one of the largest that you'll find there. We've done a focus on Brazil, but I also wanted just to highlight the sort of Latin America as a whole. Latin America is an incredibly dynamic place for e-commerce and for being online. It's a very rewarding in terms of return on investment as well, especially in the online marketing side. We would encourage you to have a look at that. And as I said, we have quite a few assets that you can pull down from our website or from this webinar as an infographic on those markets. Definitely a part of the world to watch in terms of size and growth. So with that, before just so that we can move on and get onto the strategies, I'm just going to do a quick other poll, which is, what are your top 2 export destination markets for 2019? Which markets interest you most to export to? Is it going to be Latin America or the Middle East or China, or a bit of both? Where Europe? I'm getting a really strong preference, I think, for Europe. And the rest is very divided, because a lot of you are interested in Latin America, a lot of you in the Middle East, and a lot of you in China, and a lot of you in other places. I didn't have enough space on a poll to put all the places. And again, you're very happy if you could, if you wanted to give us more comment on that, comment in the survey at the end. Good, great. I'm glad to see that so many of you are interested in Europe as well. That's always very reassuring for us. And also in China, in Latin America, and the Middle East. All of those are fantastic markets where you can get great online returns. So now let's talk about some of the choices exporters face when they look at e-commerce. Before we do that, before we look at the actual sort of choices, I think there's something that we have to go through first. And I apologize if some of you know this already, but for us, it's important that you understand what localization means. This is going to be terrifically important for any one of the choices that you opt for for e-commerce. It's called localization. And to really understand that, the best way that I have to explain it is to talk about search engines. These are the things that drive the internet and organize the internet. And Google, for example, is the dominant one in the world, but then there's Baidu in China, Yandex in Russia, and so on. So, how do all of these search engines work? I think the key that I want to bring out is that they are localized. And the way to think about that is that the Google you might have in the United States is different, fundamentally different from the Google that I have in the UK. Google Argentina is in Spanish, and it's different from Google Mexico, which is in Spanish. So it's not just the language that's different. It's the Google makes it client-focused, customer-focused. So what interests Google is the perspective of the searcher. So think of it as 192 different search engines, each specific to that market. And if you understand that, then you just have to say, okay, in that case, the searches are going to be different wherever I go. In that case, when I'm looking at a search engine, if I'm sitting here in Nebraska and my company comes up #1 on my Google Nebraska, is that the same as Google China? Oh, sorry, not Google China, Google Australia or Google France? And without localizing your website, the answer is going to be no. So I gave a little example here. I got one of my colleagues to type in, she sits in Florida, and I got google.com. I asked her to type in red shoes. She typed in red shoes, and this is the screenshot of what she gets when she looks at red shoes. She gets DSW, Macy's, Kohl's, Zappos, and so on. And I get something very different. I'm sitting in London today, and I took a screenshot, google.co.uk, that's the Google search engine in the UK. I get a very different result. Why is that? Because Google knows that I'm sitting in London, and Google knows that that interests me more than what you could buy in Florida. Google thinks I'm going to cater it, specify it, tailor it to my searcher. So I'm client-focused, I'm customer-focused. Another way of looking at it is through what we call keywords. Red shoes might work the same in the US and in the UK, but not all searchers are the same, even when you're using the same language. This is one of my favorite examples of this. We have a company actually that works with in the train sector, and we looking at keywords for them. So if you're sitting in Brazil, what do you put in? What does a Brazilian put in to their search engine? And Google has about a 95% market share in Brazil. So you get to Google Brazil, you type in something on train, what word do you use? You use the word trem. If you're in Portugal, you're still in Portuguese, and you've got Google as well. Google has about a 95% market share in Portugal. And you're sitting there in Portugal, you're Portuguese, you type in something on train, you're going to use the word comboio. You have to get the words right, in other words. You have to be market specific and client focused. So if the search engines are market specific and client focused, your websites, your online marketing strategy, your everything you do on the web has to be also market specific and client focused in order to have an effect. So that's sort of the background of search engine optimization, and also of how localization works. It also works in social media. The big, the massive Facebook is also localized. Facebook is available in over 100 different languages. There's more Facebook outside the USA than inside the USA. About nearly 80% of Facebook's users are outside the USA. So again, this is how, when you're looking at e-commerce strategy and online marketing, you're going to have to be client focused, customer centric, market specific, because your social media apps are, your search engines are, and therefore your websites and your marketing has to be. So I've grouped together on one single slide what website localization is. And as you can see, there are 10 criteria that we list as the top things you need to have to be localized. Language is one of 10. There are many other aspects that make a website localized, and similarly for online marketing. So the correct language is only one of those, and the correct keywords one of those. There are all kinds of other things, from hosting locally to content management systems to registered domain names. These are all just as important. We're going to do our last slide, and then we're going to dig down into some of these big malls. Right, so the last slide, here you go. Do you have localized websites? for your export markets? Are you already using localized websites for your exports? And are you using them in all of your main export markets? Just a few export markets? Are you thinking about it? And some of you, and I really applaud this, are already looking at all of your main export markets. That's really fantastic. There's quite a few of you on your main export markets that are already doing that. And then there's some of you which are also just a few export markets. And then one or two of you also, more than one or two, but percentage-wise, just also thinking about it. Well, that's great. I'm glad to see that you're all engaged with that, certainly. And I hope that I've sparked at least some thoughts about website localization. Let's now talk about the choices directly in terms of companies when they look at e-commerce. We've basically drilled it down and tried to simplify it and say that there are 3 types of choice for you as a company to go online and do e-commerce. The first choice is to have online marketplaces. This basically is what we talked about earlier, Alibaba, Rakuten. But maybe we can also get Vanessa to talk through these. Vanessa?
Thank you, Susanna. So here we've got 3 options for B2B and B2C companies looking to sell via e-commerce internationally. One, as Susanna just mentioned, online marketplaces like Amazon or Alibaba. 2 is to sell directly from your website. You can choose from a host of different e-commerce plugins like WooCommerce or BigCommerce. The third option is distributor platforms. Now let's take a look at the marketplaces. So for online marketplaces, there are really 3 global giants plus some very strong regional players. The 3 e-commerce giants are built on different business models. We've got closed system. This is really the Amazon model. It's an all-inclusive package for companies. So it includes warehouse management, logistics, and customer service. I'm sure you all know Amazon already, and if you're a US company and work on Amazon already, it can be an easy jump to international. But I'd like to point out that Amazon has just 13% of global e-commerce, as it is not present in some markets. So you need to make sure Amazon works well in your target export market. Next up, we've got open systems like Alibaba or Rakuten in Japan. This is where they provide a shopping platform and payment gateway, but companies can choose to manage inventory, logistics, and customer service by themselves. There are also some really important local players like Zalando in Germany or Mercado Libre. But let's take Alibaba as an example of the real cost of doing business on a marketplace. Certainly, these marketplaces have made it look extremely easy for companies, but pure e-commerce from start is not a real option. Now, Alibaba may have promised that through using their platform, you will get your own locally hosted microsite quick and easy. Amazon, JD.com are the same. In reality, it is complicated, expensive, and very different from your known Western model in that you will have less control and poor margins. Here we have listed 5 of the top constraints that we see over and over again working with marketplaces. You will have to pay annual fees, management fees, and commission to the platform. These are specified based on the product category you're in, and the price occasionally increases as of when your e-commerce provider feels like it. Particularly on Alibaba and the Chinese marketplaces like JD.com, you can only run pay-per-click campaigns using their own products. They dictate terms and how-tos. There are also certain key placements such as homepage banners that you just can't get hold of unless they like you. On top of this, they also require you to have local Chinese contacts in place for when things do go wrong. Another crucial requirement is that you need a local customer service call center to be alive 24/7. But once your site got built on Alibaba, you had already sunk in a lot of money and efforts in order to gain customers. You might find it too late to be pulling back. Now, we're not saying that marketplace is not a good option. In fact, it's a fantastic option for both B2B and B2C, but we just want to make sure that you control the brand and get the costing right. Nevertheless, this is often a very valid choice. But how can we mitigate some of the disadvantages of selling via these huge global marketplaces? I will now hand over to Susanna for strategy.
Thanks, Vanessa. Great sort of recap of a marketplace, that there are hidden costs and constraints, even in the more open ones like Alibaba. So the pros and cons. These marketplaces, Amazon, Alibaba, JD, Rakuten, all of them, they're easy, they're quick. There's a minimum upfront investment, and you don't have to do a lot of the maintenance. So that makes it a really easy first step. It makes it a very natural place to go if you're just starting out, particularly if you're B2C. If you're on consumer goods. If you have, a longer term view, it's not, you're going to have to think about some of the disadvantages. In particular, the fact that you're not really developing a brand of your own. It's very hard to develop brand awareness if you're on a huge marketplace. You also don't really control the marketing, so you can't actually control when or not to push that brand. And because of that, because it's a big marketplace, there's not always good product differentiation. And of course, then we've talked a little bit about these fees and other hidden costs, which people don't always realize right from the start. So one of the strategies that works very well is to complement the marketplace with your own localized website. So let's say you go on to Amazon, or you can go on to a JD or an Alibaba or whatever it is, platform, big marketplace. And when you go onto that, but you double it with a localized website, that allows you to really build up your brand through marketing, through online marketing, through social media. It allows you also to really differentiate your product and say, we are different from what else you'll find on that. And you can actually pull people from the Amazon platform or the marketplace platform onto your website. And then you are getting the brand recognition, you are developing the leads, you are developing the long-term sustainable growth that you need for great business. So that's one of the things that we find for our clients as a strategy is, if you're going to go on a marketplace, think about having a localized websites to complement it, to really build up a brand recognition, and that helps mitigate some of those disadvantages. Now, the next type of strategy really is sort of a DIY strategy. It's taking some of these plugins, and there's just a huge wealth of them possible, these plugins, and then saying, okay, I'm going to put that into a website. And here you say, okay, which ones, big commerce or which one should I go on? WordPress actually has differentiated and built up a lot of e-commerce software platforms themselves. Those ones that I've listed there are all in fact part of WordPress. WooCommerce is one of the largest. They now drive something like 18% or 20% of all world global e-commerce functionality. The point to look at, if you're going to go at your own, if you're going to do this yourself, make sure that the plugin you take is the right one for your market, that it works globally, that it accepts multilingual, and that it's scalable, most of all. After all, you will be growing with this. Some of the pros and cons, however. The pros, it's easy, it's fast, you can do this quickly, and there's a minimum amount of investment as well. The other big pro about this, you control the marketing. So that's, the really good news. On the other side, if you just plug in an e-commerce functionality to your existing domestic website, you are not going to have an international presence that's worth really anything. You're not going to be generating international leads through this, except by complete coincidence. So there are difficulties there. How do you grow internationally unless you also develop localized websites to support that global international e-commerce? So again, our response to that is, you probably, for us, you definitely need your own localized website for your target export markets in order to bounce back the e-commerce that you're getting, in order to generate leads in those markets. That'll offer, you're multilingual. It'll offer you, you can offer multilingual support on that. You can manage your own marketing completely. What about that? I mean, what comes as a problem with that is a lot of companies don't always have all the in-house linguistic ability, the in-house marketing ability, online ability, and it takes a lot of management time. And that's where I would say, I'm just doing a little plug for us here. That's the kind of thing that you need great partners for. Companies like ourselves, IBT Online, we come in and we manage that whole international online presence for you. So again, the answer for yourself, if you're looking about build your own e-commerce platforms, you cannot really do that for an international audience unless you have international localized websites. Then the third, and probably the most common amongst the B2B world, is when you go on a distributor platform. There are two types of distributor platforms, either generalist, and these can be anything like sort of Lowe's, or they're very specialized one, only electrical company or something like that, Rexel, I'll put an example here. So you can have very specialized sites, or you can have generalist sites. And these are all distributors, so these can either be tied to you, or they can be just independent and global sites. And this seems to be very much for the B2B world as far as we can see. Again, some of the major advantages, it's pretty easy on management time and resources. You just basically hand the problem over to your distributor. Your distributor implements it, they market it. There's a limited investment from your side. So it is a very natural, like, wow, that's one problem we don't have to deal with. Our distributor, our local in-market partner is going to deal with this whole issue. However, there's some major disadvantages that you have to think about long-term. Distributors are not necessarily exactly on the same wavelength as yourself as a company. A distributor often has a narrower focus also than you might have in terms of that market. There's, you're going to have to think about where your brand is and how your brand is developing. Are you really nurturing your brand, or are you nurturing the distributor's brand? Are you, in fact, adding value to the distributor rather than to yourself? There's also a danger of a conflict of interest. Is your distributor exclusive, or is he distributing for other companies as well? If it's for other companies, careful on that. Who's he putting up on the website? Who's he actually doing the marketing for? Because you don't control that marketing. And again, we found that having a localized website allows you to then implement brand development, marketing, and have a clear goal and clear set of interests. I think one of the advantages of it as well is that it allows the company to have a window on end clients. Your end clients in that market, you can't see that if it's your distributor working for you in that market. But if you have your own website and your distributor is interacting with that website, then of course you can. And there's some of the examples that we want to give you in terms of case studies. So just sort of rounding up that section in terms of strategies. The three strategies that we're talking about, either marketplaces or a build your own or distributor platforms, all benefit if you control your online presence. Your online presence is controlled by you through localized websites. It allows you to get found in the local market, be understood in the local market, and do business in the local market. So that's sort of the core of that sort of lesson. We want to just really focus now on briefly, very quickly, on some case studies and best practices. I realize we're going through time quickly. You can, if you go to our website and go, which is IBT Online or IBT.onl, you will find a whole bunch of testimonials and success stories and blogs all about other company experiences going internationally and using localized websites, online marketing. And I would really encourage you to look through, and there's some testimonials and videos that you can find. And if you go through, you can see, oh, that company is similar to us. That speaks to me. And see how they've worked out to build global brands, and through e-commerce, with localized websites and online marketing. Now, the first case study I want to give you is All World Machinery. They are a mid-sized company. They're a U.S. company, and I think what's interesting here is that they really work. Their clients are all very, very large. They're original equipment manufacturers. They're very large clients. So this is a mid-sized company. They really have to focus on giving fantastic service and having everything available, and just being able to impress these very large OEMs by saying, yes, we can punch above our weight. We might be a small company, but we can provide you what you need. And they knew they had to go online to give that service to those OEMs. And the service, and particularly in their Mexico market, because that was a particularly difficult one to start with. So we built them this website, which was e-commerce enabled, and allowed them then to sort of punch above their weight for those. And I think that was, and again, you can listen to the testimonial from Dave, but I think what's interesting is how they used the website to then really satisfy these very large clients and push on service. So this is very much a B2B response. The next one that I wanted to highlight is also a mid-sized company. What's interesting here is that this is a company that sells to many, many different types of verticals. And so they could well have several distributors in each market. And they have, they're from food processing to schools and art supplies. They will be servicing different types of companies here. And one of the things that bothered them the most was not having visibility on their end client. They had distributors there, and it was hard. There were two challenges. One was the distributors would always say, yes, you're giving more resources to that distributor than mine. And also, oh, we're not doing well because, and they never could really tell. There was no real analysis of why things were going well or not well. So they decided to really take that back in hand and build a series of websites. So they built some first across Europe, and then it worked so well, they built them in many other markets as well. And here what's interesting is that they'll have in-market distributors and partners in those markets, and those distributors put orders in back through the website so that the company gains access to their end client. And in each market, every single distributor has the same resource. If there's a new product launch, everybody gets it at the same time. Everybody has the same. So that's, again, a really fantastic resource for the websites. This company chose to go online, e-commerce enabled in Brazil. Brazil is a very challenging e-commerce market. It's a very dynamic market. It's fun if you get it right, but it's a tricky one to get a hold of. Their products, it was very important for them to offer a full range of their products in a very clean, easy way to buy. It must be extremely easy. And again, they wanted to generate demand and distinguish themselves from other companies. And that's been a great success for them. I want to also now just turn back to Vanessa and talk about another client. So Vanessa, maybe you could run through this one.
Yeah, so our client Farkla is a privately owned mid-sized company. They have a good partner in China, but management realized that the world is changing. It's online. To gain real brand awareness and long-term sales in a local market, you need a local online presence, even more so in China. They have decided to double down in China. Chinese websites and online marketing are highly specific based on Chinese search engines and Chinese social media platforms, and all need to be fine-tuned to suit local Chinese prospects. Now, if you want more details, head over to our website to hear what Mirana, Farkla's marketing director, has to say. So as soon as we launched the new Chinese website, we worked with Farkla team to create and optimize engaging social media for the China market. Now, in the case of Farkla, they had established their own corporate entity in late 2017, and that, coupled with their in-market partners, made it easy to create a WeChat account. And as we have just explained, this is the most powerful social media platform in China. Using WeChat and Weibo allowed a wider reach to nurture the Farkla brand. We're helping with content creation as well, modeling it on the company's existing content, but fully localizing the content to suit Chinese buyers. On top of that, we also conduct regular reporting and reviewing Baidu analytics to keep everyone on the same page. Our efforts are all focused on building Farkla's sales, brand, and business in China. Now, if you would like to know more about these case studies, contact myself or Susanna, or head over to the success story section on our website.
Thanks, Vanessa. I think we're pretty well run out of time. I see, though, that there's a lot of questions that you've put in. As Vanessa said, I mean, check out some of the other testimonials. You'll discover much more about how companies have decided to what strategies they've used and things. But I would also like to spend a little bit of time looking at some of the questions. So one of the very first questions I'm going to bounce back to you, Vanessa. Here's one. Can you give us some indication of how much it costs to sell via e-commerce platforms like JD or Alibaba? So Vanessa, in China,
Okay.
JD and Alibaba.
Yeah, so it's quite a lot, and it is a bit complicated. For example, JD and Tmall, the cost for starters is a first deposit of roughly 15,000 USD as a frozen deposit. It's like a guarantee. If you break the rules, they fine you and take it off your deposits. Then there is an annual fee of roughly 1,000 US dollars. On top of that, you've also got to pay for commission on every sale, which varies from 3 to 10% depending on category. And obviously they reserve the right to raise commission whenever they choose.
Also, this goes back again to making sure you're aware of the costs on these marketplaces. The next question is more general, just about international localized websites, and just says, where do we start? Which is a great question. I love that question. Where do we start for international localized websites? I would say the first thing to do is identify your markets. Identify which markets interest you most internationally. Pick two. Pick two markets which you think either have the most upside ahead of them, or that you want to explore the most. And those are the markets you want to focus on. That's generally where we see our clients coming from. Is these two markets interest us the most, and just start from there, and then give us a call. Vanessa, what role should my international distributors play for online marketing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we get asked that a lot. Distributors and in-market partners can be, great resources, but not always skilled enough in online marketing to really get the most out of search engine optimization, paid social and paid search campaigns, and all of the other tools that an experienced international marketeer uses. While they can be a great resource and should be part of an overall strategy, we find that we get better results when the local distributor is not in charge.
Perfect. Yeah. There's one more which I'm going to take now, which is just again about distributors and in-market partners. Just asking, if I've got a localized website, but if I have several distributors, how does that work? And I think we just really want to emphasize just a localized website is actually a very empowering thing for in-market partners. It allows you to organize your distributors, and it makes it a level playing field. You can give them all the same tools at the same time, which is a really fantastic thing to do as well in terms of your management. And I guess the other point is that to use the distributors perfectly, in an optimal way, you really want them to have these resources which are local to their market. And a localized website works best in our experience with our clients. I'm going to have to call it a day. I see that there's a lot of other questions there. I think what we'll do is probably come back to you with some of those. I would really urge you as well to answer the survey at the end of this webinar. And it just stays with me then, rests with me then to say thank you so much for being here. Thank you also, Vanessa, for joining me. And happy exporting to you all. We wish you all the best, and take care. Happy exporting. Thank you. Bye-bye.